would crumple an airplane. There's no question about it. This building wouldn't stand if it didn't have that. Now here we are at Union Square. Again, I'm fascinated with the granite, the strength of that stone. This is all about observing nature. I call this being the accidental physicist. And just by being a human being and taking note of what's going on in your environment. Even a little signpost would wreak havoc with an airplane, because you see there'll be other examples of birds. These are some of the rules so that people get along with each other better. Look at that. This poor guy's coming in for a landing without wheels. Very, very delicate. This is one airplane that sort of butted up against another. It totally crumples. Any type of tapping or touching of an airplane has big, big consequences. See that? The airplane just hits a truck coming by, and the truck has got to be less substantial than those heavy rocks, concrete, steel that buildings are made out of. Here I am down on Wall Street, and these are some of the columns that have been used in some YouTube videos that show Mack trucks driving into them. Mack trucks, which are much stronger than airplanes, totally crumple if you run into one of these steel columns at a great speed. And I can assure you these steel columns are much, much thinner than the columns that were reinforcing the World Trade Center. We're going to go on the other side here, and you're going to see Trinity Church. Here's another example. You talk about the church, a rock upon which the faith is built. So we create monuments that last and endure. Whoever built this church, they're probably not alive today, and yet their legacy goes on in the architecture, in the strength, in the immovability, we would say, of the earth element. Again, it's another column on Wall Street. And I'm going to flip back and forth here some of the airplane shots. You see how fragile airplanes are. Here we are at Wall Street. I want to mention that most financing for corporations, when they want to do projects, they do not raise capital by selling stock on Wall Street. They raise it by going to reinsurers, and they reinsure based on the future earnings of the projected income of the corporation to do that. This is across the street from the stock exchange. 14 days left before this jewelry store, that's probably been there for a long time, is going to move upstairs. So there'll probably be more touristy things there on Wall Street. There we are going down to Wall Street and Broad. And again, I'll flip back and forth to look at this airplane. The wheel came off. Very delicate. Airplanes are very delicate. That's a Federal Hall, a national monument, and there's a statue of George Washington. The airplane wouldn't even survive going into a statue of George Washington. All of these show, again, how delicate the airplanes are, and how strong these statues are. Again, that statue, I think, was put up in 1882, if I'm not mistaken. It's endured through a lot of time, rain, weather. These airplanes have to be serviced every year, very strict with the Federal FAA. There's another airplane shot showing how, I guess, it dropped an engine or something, a jet. There we are going down towards the river, the East River, and if I'm not mistaken, that's the WBAI building. That's 120 Wall Street. And again, there's my bike there. Geez, even my bike would cause damage to some of these airplanes. And you saw how delicate that was. So here we are on Wall Street as we're hitting the river, and what I'm going to be doing is going up the river, and there'll just be one thing left on this roll. Again, look at that airplane. It's, all these airplane crashes, very delicate. That's the WBAI building. It's being remodeled now, but it's a deco style, 120 Wall Street. And I beg the liberals to consider reality. There's even this is bigger than a bird, and you can imagine the destruction it would do. Look at that propeller going into the other. This would do the same, and then my tape ended. So I'll just finish up a minute or two of these airplane crashes, and just to give you an idea of reality. And then we're going to talk to Harold Channer about how such things can happen. Oh, look at the bird. Can you see the bird's poor feet there? That was quite an impressive shot. And you saw what damage the bird did. So, yeah, there's another bird shot. It's a big deal when a little bird flies into an airplane. How could it possibly believe that airplanes can penetrate buildings? And, that was a building itself. Now, this is something off YouTube that has nothing to do with the whole 9/11 issue. It's just a collection of airplane crashes, but it turns out to be very useful for the topic at hand. And Molly's going to be joining me now pretty soon, and I'll be calling Harold Channer up so we can...
Hello.
So, Harold, what do you think of the airplane crashes?
Well, it's really amazing among all the pictures you have. Hello.
Yes, I'm with you. Maybe turn your sound down.
Yeah, I just did. Yeah,
okay, great.
You got an airplane underwater, and now there's a sensor or something, and all of that.
It's now
and
over.
How fragile the airplanes are compared to the strength of the buildings.
Yeah, and so what I was thinking when I was going up to gather all this footage, Molly often talks about the accidental gardener because she wants to have a show about gardening, and I was thinking to call this show The Accidental Physicist. that somebody just going around town, just making some observations, can do layman's physics, and how valuable the common man's observation can be if he's empowered that observation has some value and measured next to somebody's PhDs and credentials and peer-reviewed articles and all of that.
Common sense.
Cannons. Accepted cannons, yeah. And then the thing is that this is part of the evidence or evidence to be submitted about there being no airplanes on 9/11. Is that it?
Well, this is just this little public access producer's contribution to a consideration.
Yeah, of that. But it's behind that premise, though, right?
Yeah, what I'm saying is it doesn't make sense. I'm saying I'm questioning the institutions. I'm questioning the credentials. If somebody says to me, gee, Paula, what do you know about physics? I'm saying, well, I'm the accidental physicist. I just walked around.
Well, there's something to that. There's wisdom in that. Yeah.
So those were what those shots were earlier.
You just did that. You just came upon those now. Molly's still with us. Hello, Mom.
It's hard to escape from New York.
I know. It's like a tar baby. There used to be a thing where you'd hit the tar baby and then you get stuck. Or La Brea tar pits, I think. Anyway, I'm glad you're still here. It's a far better place. And,
your mixed metaphors kind of amuse me sometimes.
Yeah, you're having a good time, I'm hoping. That's good.
Well, there's always moments.
Yeah, I don't know what to say, Paula, about the airplanes. I'm trying to always understand what does it mean, and it goes back to this dispute between people who believe there were airplanes and not airplanes on 9/11. Is that what that's in support of?
Let's take 9/11 aside. Let's just take the concept of an airplane going through a building, just from what I showed, even through a relatively smaller steel column that they used to keep traffic from going in certain areas, like
right.
I've got.
But in a way, if you can kind of not be attached to the implications and just look at the evidence.
Yeah, okay. It's empirical. Yeah, all right.
Like, for example,
that's a point to be made,
the Sphinx show that you still haven't seen after all these years, but that's all right. We forgive you. We showed a picture of the Sphinx with his head masked off.
There's masking tape on the head of the Sphinx.
You're just looking at rock formations. And then John Anthony West showed that to a geologist in England. And said, well, what do you think caused this weathering? And the guy said, well, it's obviously water. Well, then
water erosion.
Water erosion.
Because he's a geologist.
He's a geologist, and the rocks,
had water erosion.
Had water erosion. So then he takes it off, and then all of a sudden the guy realizes the implications of what he just said, and that there hasn't been water in the Sahara for a long, long time. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh. And then he wouldn't put his reputation on the line because he knew that it flew in the face of any kind of conventional interpretation. And so therefore John eventually got a guy from BU, Robert Schock, to go on the record, and luckily he had tenure so they couldn't fire him. But it was interesting that if you can suspend your expectations of the consequences of the evidence, you kind of get a lot further than you would if you just want everything to fit into a very
established.
Well, no, a universe that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all very good. That's good empirical research and everything like that. And I don't know. I know in Herodotus' time or something they were talking. That was a great. The point there. Okay. I see. My mind just naturally goes to trying to put it into a pattern. Although I can understand what you're saying. Just the facts, ma'am. Joe Friday.
Well, but
that's
sort of the human.
Point. Yeah. Okay.
That's sort of the human condition.
It into some other pattern.
No, but that's sort of the human condition. You know, we grow up and we want to make sense of everything that we see.
Yeah.
And when things don't slot in where we want them to, all of a sudden we think we haven't seen them.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I think you're right. I think that's the way the mind works, doesn't it? Because it's got a pattern that it wants everything to fit into. And it's a problem in terms of when something comes up as an anomaly, how do you deal with it, and what are the consequences of that? And I guess that's what you're talking about. And the consequences of your thing with the Sphinx is that it was much older than the canon, unquote, was asserting.
Exactly. The Egyptologists basically went berserk and called us every name in the book and said that our science was faulty and that we didn't know what we were talking about and haven't we read the books and all this kind of stuff. And the geologist, who had no attachment to any kind of anthropological implications, he just said the rocks don't lie.
I couldn't hear the last. The rock what?
The rocks don't lie.
Right. The rocks don't lie. So you got a piece of evidence that would support an out-of-the-box way of thinking. That's what we want. I know when...
Everybody likes people who think out of the box until they start thinking out of the box.
Or everybody wants to meet somebody.
It's really interesting to me. Mendeleev came up with the periodic tables and everything that's the basis of much and everything. He had a projection that he made, and there were gaps in our having empirical evidence of the existence of certain things or elements and so forth. And but he set up a box, and he had a place. Well, there will be one here, there will be one here, there will be one here, and lo and behold, they all came up, in time forward from what he was doing. I guess that's.
But did people ridicule him for...
Oh, yeah, they would be ridiculing him and so forth for we can't... Or Pasteur came up with the idea that there could be germs that you can't see. And people said, well, I can't see anything. There's nothing there. And Pasteur was ridiculed.
No, and from what I understand, surgeons, in order to prove he was wrong...
our famous Galileo and Copernicus.
Wait. But Harold, listen to this. They took their scalpels during operation and wiped it on their shoes to prove...
Why not? There's no such thing as a germ, because if there was a germ, I could see it. And you didn't have a microscope or anything, and the microorganisms couldn't be seen. So there's back and forth between those two things about empirical evidence and that kind of thing, and just stuff that fits into a pattern that comes. It goes both ways, I guess. But apart from that, the idea of the airplanes, what got you to be interested in thinking about those airplanes was this thinking that you're doing around the, if I may, Paul, because of your no-plane notions about what happened on 9/11, I believe, right?
Well, I think, Harold, it also is because I had a boyfriend for 7 years who was a pilot. He was, we used to take a little airplane. It was a little Grumman from the Oakland airport up into Lake Tahoe.
Gorgeous.
And I know, he was just passionate about flying.
Yeah.
And he was an astrologer who did the commodities trading, so he had wealthy clients that would call up and ask how, what the stars were like, because, if people are feeling very expanded and optimistic and confident, then things like gold and, they don't cling on to possessions like gold as much. And when they're contracted, then they want to hold on to more stable investments.
Yes.
So he had a pretty good track record with people who were using his services, but nevertheless, he was sort of a scholarly type. He didn't have that much money. He did have his airplane paid for, his house paid for. But any kind of accident with the airplane would have been so costly that he would have had to give up flying. So that's why you had to be so careful when you're going in and out and when you're parking. Even a little tap, on a car or an airplane next to it would be a disaster. And then you had the FAA that was constantly inspecting, so you had to go around, make sure all of the nuts are tied up. And this is what John Lear was saying, that the jets, I guess Boeing, has to, by law, with the FAA, have each of the 8 million something parts, has to have notation on it, has to be stamped, so that if those parts fly anywhere else, you know that it belongs to that airplane. And there's 300 miles worth of wire that goes into each airplane that's also carefully marked, so that when the repairman is fixing up a wire in one end of the airplane, he knows that that wire matches to the other part of the airplane.
Wow.
So all of this stuff is so specific. So in an airplane crash, you can, through the rubble, know exactly, by even a little tiny part, which airplane produced that part, which airplane flew apart.
God, that got an analogy to DNA.
So that's why I think the story didn't sit, maybe perhaps just having more first-hand experience with flying and the fragility of airplanes, that perhaps I had a leg up to sort of get out of the hypnotic spell that people who are more intelligent than I am aren't.
No, that's not possible, Paula.
Well,
nobody's more intelligent than you are.
No.
Anyway,
they have degrees, they're physicists. No, I think they really
But perception and common sense and all kinds of things like that. So, okay, that's interesting. That's the case. You're doing all that.
And what I found with scientists is that we forget that they're humans and that they have emotional reactions to all of this evidence.
Right.
And then when it flies in the face of convention, they have a very strong reaction, and they don't behave very scientifically. They behave like children, because I find a lot of scientists haven't done much emotional work. They've sort of been in their ivory tower for a long time.
Yeah.
And so they have these childish reactions. And I was really astonished when we had this huge reaction to this documentary that I worked on.
Yeah.
And because I was under this illusion that scientists were scientific about everything, not just, whatever they were studying.
Yeah,
and
scientists, because they got it's like the canon, in every field, every specialist. A specialist doesn't want to be brought into a thing where their special understanding, and they've carefully worked out and worked the scientific process, is included within a larger context either. They don't like that at all, because they've got their narrative. Or I suppose it works politically. A nation has its narrative,
right? That
kind of thing. And anything that's going to include them in another pattern of understanding, it's a creative process.
Well, it has to do with paradigms, once again.
Yes, exactly.
It has to do with new realities. What does it take for people to accept a new reality? And I think, what is it that shifts perception? Like right now, science seems to be the sort of baseline, I don't know, it used to be religion or Christianity or whatever you want to call it, and now it's science. It's like we sort of say, oh, well, science is empirical. Well, you'll find that that's not really true.
Yeah. Well, it comes, I guess, probably in the modern, like with the Enlightenment and so forth, and there's all that, and then people get ideologically locked into something.
Well, Einstein, for example, now we put Einstein up on this pedestal and freeze him. And there's no, he really didn't like quantum physics. How do you feel about quantum physics?
I don't know very much about it, except you got unified field and quantum physics, and Einstein was unified field, and a lot of the quantum mechanics were breaking things down into its component parts, and so where that accelerator is about to fire up in CERN, they're going to be able to get down into some sort of particles that will...
But from what I understand,
so one is breaking it all up, and the other one is trying to find a unified field.
But what I'm trying to say is that at the time, Einstein was very against quantum physics, from what I understand, and now we sort of take it as
given.
A given, exactly. And so I think it's very interesting that here we are accepting quantum physics and Einstein, and most people don't realize that he was against quantum physics.
Yeah, I think those are arguments of the people that are involved in the intricacies of the thinking about it, rather than a pattern of it. We still don't have a clear, absolute certain. One of the things is it's just going to be synergistically. There's something more than the sum of the parts. There's something more than, there's no absolutes that you can put your finger on, only just, synergistic behavioral systems, unpredictable, the sum of the parts, the uncertainty principle, and all these things have come into thinking. And so that's something that is inherent, I think inherent in the nature of the evolution of consciousness.
But then look at what happens. Look at what happens to reality. These are pictures of the damage that a bird does to an airplane.
Yeah, and that's something, yeah.
So, if the scientists are so ensconced in a belief system that's handed down from authority to authority to authority, then pretty soon what happens...
What are we looking at? I don't really... It's kind of blurry.
Albatross or something?
That's the legs of a bird on the bottom left. The legs of a bird that got embedded into the wing above. That's the damage.
I see.
See the wing above there? That's the bird got mangled into the airplane. It was flying along and the airplane flew into it. That's how delicate an airplane is. And how.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, who cares about the authority of the scientists when your own eyes show you something like this? You say, airplane weak, building strong.
Yeah, the Flatiron. Yeah, you showed those buildings. Yeah, they're right around the corner from me. Yeah, that Marley thing. The granite's pretty strong stuff. And then that thing about the water erosion evidence gives you different things. And I really don't know how to deal with that. It's all just parts of...
limestone.
The Sphinx was made out of limestone.
The head is an outcropping of granite, so it didn't... Water erosion didn't affect it as much, although wind and sand, because I don't know if you know anything about the Sphinx, but it's actually carved out of one huge piece of stone.
Oh, that was there?
Yeah, well, no, they carved it down. The Sphinx enclosure, when you look at it, it's sort of like in a pit. So there was, when it fills full of sand, the only thing that sticks out is the head, and that was a granite outcropping. And then when
I didn't know that. I've been there, but I didn't remember that.
Well, when you dig it out, the head is of granite and the rest of it is on limestone. So the water erosion was actually protected by all the sand that when it would fill in. I mean, the stela that's on it, the big sort of structure, a slab of stone in front of it, talks about Khephren. What's his name? Paula, what's the... Khephren. And sort of said, well, this guy had a mystical experience and said, if you clean out all the sand around me, you will be the pharaoh that everyone will remember. So what's interesting is that on the stela, he makes note of that, so that it's interesting that it was already in place when he was a pharaoh, that he just cleared all the sand away from it, and that it was already there by the time the Old Kingdom was there. So,
Oh, okay, that's all kind of interesting. That's all really...
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it is. And it's all... Well, you want to get some understanding of things and how we get to it. I don't know. It's all very interesting.
But once again, it's based on looking at trying to figure out what really happened as opposed to buying into sort of illusions of what you would like to think happened.
Or what you were told.
Yeah, well, that's part of the idea of the fish in the goldfish bowl can't see the water it's swimming in. Got to, in a certain sense, be outside of it. That's why artists are often outside and or figuring ground, where you can have a perception outside of the context of accepted reality.
Harold, take a look at
and that really upsets a lot of people because their identities are wrapped up within the happy thoughts of the way that things are.
Happy thoughts.
Leads to fundamentalist reaction to perceptions of something new and different.
The happy illusion, or the not so happy illusion. So
and when they had the shift Galileo and Copernicus, they had people who were just, because a lot of it came off measuring the elliptical pathway orbits of Jupiter and so forth, and they would have all kinds of things where they were trying to bend the old way in order to have it be accepted and so forth, rather than accept the consequences of the fact that we were not, in fact, the center of the universe.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if you look at your computer screen right now, you'll see precisely what I'm talking about. You see those sort of round, undulating curves on the
yes,
shoulders?
I do. Yeah, this limestone.
That's limestone. And then you can see where the headdress starts. It is definitely a different type of stone. And my brother, who is also a geologist,
Right there.
you know, you see where the cursor is?
Yes, I do.
That's where the break is. And then you can see down here.
No, that doesn't.
All right. Here, show where the walls are over here, Paula. You see that? No, up here.
I know the mouse.
Right there, that's it.
That's the walls of the Sphinx enclosure that is almost at the same height as the shoulders. I mean, from this perspective, it doesn't look that way, but when you're actually in it, I was really astonished to find out that it doesn't really sit up on the desert floor. It sits down in this enclosure.
So that means the head was exposed just like the level of that sand over here for many, many years. So they had to dig this out, yet when they dug it out, it was more eroded than this part up here.
Right.
I'll be damned. That's really amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's just simple science.
So that was covered.
Yeah, with sand.
See, this part is level with that part.
Up to there's the head. If you look at the Sphinx enclosure, and when we actually finally get you to watch this thing, you'll see different angles on this, and you'll really experience the fact that it is an enclosure and that it's carved down into a pit almost.
I'll be darned.
A huge pit.
Because doesn't it have like paws sticking out in the front?
Paws sticking out in the front and the rump behind.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll be son of a gun. That's really something. And then the geologist thought that it's obviously water erosion.
Well, yes, because wait, cut off the head, Paula, just like you were doing.
Oh, I was just another shot.
Well,
that's limestone.
Anyway.
Yeah.
We'll have a little thing over at your place and get my brother and Bill Cody, who was the director on it, to hopefully come over and we can all talk about our experiences with the Sphinx. Because
maybe we should do a program about it sometime and have you get a clip from it and do that kind of a thing.
Because Johnny and Bill live here in New York, so they're pretty accessible.
You got. Now, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar. Who is Johnny and Phil?
Johnny is my brother, or John, or John as he's called now. And then Bill is his business partner, and he directed the video that we did.
Oh, wow, really? Will you out there let me have contact information from them, or when you're back, maybe?
When you watch the video, I will give you the keys to the kingdom.
Wonderful, sure.
And then also Molly's father.
We can play a clip of it. The film's about an hour, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then these friends